Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Vinoy, Head of Marketing and Product at Assure. And this week, we are talking about small business relief changes to the PPP loan program. With me today, I feel really privileged to have a special guest, Rob Basso. Rob is the founder of Associated HCM, and now really lucky to call Rob part of the family at Assure as Associated is now an Assure company. He's now the VP and General Manager for Associated, among many other responsibilities. Rob is more than an operator in the human capital management space. He's an author of the book Everyday Entrepreneur, and he's been seen on pretty much every news channel, anything that has to do with business and news. Rob's been there. Really sharp guy. Lucky to have him. So Rob, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Hopefully we get a lot of our clients to tune in, and hopefully they gain 3 or 4 helpful points to help them run their small business.
Yeah, perfect. So as always, so much of the last year, we've said many times in this weekly series, there's been more legislation that has passed that impacts human resources and payroll in the last year than there has in the prior decade, right? Between FFCRA and CARES, PPP tranche 1, 2, and 3, second draws, and now we're still making changes to PPP, and these are retroactive. So because these things inevitably involve sometimes executive orders, sometimes legislative changes, just to be clear, at Assure, we don't lean left, we don't lean right, we only lean forward for entrepreneurs. All we're trying to do is we're not sharing any political information. We're not taking any political bias or sharing any opinion. All we want to do is provide the very best information we can to make entrepreneurs more successful running their business. So last week, the White House announced news that they're going to make changes to the PPP program. And that's what we're going to jump into today. I think we carved this up into about 9 different buckets, Rob. But the big ones are, okay, it came out on the 22nd, and it really aims to provide some reforms to what I think, Republican and Democrat agree were some of the missed opportunities in the first round, right? And then including how do you help smaller businesses that didn't have the knowledge and resources in the relationships, and that ended up disproportionately impacting entrepreneurs of color, right? So before we jump in, anything you'd want to say maybe on some of the strengths, weaknesses of round 1 PPP and what you think some of the impact is going to be here on some of these changes?
Well, I know that the general public felt very poorly about the way that the first program was rolled out. There was significant confusion. Banks were unprepared. The lending relationships were really not in place, and it left people feeling more worried and concerned. And as someone themselves who used the PPP loan at my business before the Assure acquired my organization, I can concur with those feelings. But at the end of the day, we got billions of dollars. The federal government got billions of dollars into the hands of these businesses that needed them desperately to keep their doors open and keep the money flowing in the economy. So I think they get an A for effort, a B+ for execution. And I think what we're going to talk about today are some of those things to tighten up those loopholes. And they're very needed. They're very warranted. But I think the country should be proud, of the federal government, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, in control at the time, that they did the best that they could in the time frame they could to get what we needed in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think I share the sentiment. I mean, the reality is, so what are we today? We're March 4th, 2021. March 4th, 2020, I think we were at something like 10 or 12 deaths in the U.S., right? It was up in the Seattle area. The first ones were happening up in a nursing home. And then just 3 weeks later, all of a sudden, we were on fire, and FFCRA, and a week later, CARES. I think we obviously we didn't know what we didn't know, and they erred on the side of injecting money into the system as fast as possible, And it's unfortunate. I think there's people who probably didn't need money got money, and there's people who needed money that didn't. But it's pretty clear both sides of the aisle are committed to making change in helping. I don't want to say even correct the wrongs, because I think everybody gave best efforts to try to prevent. And I think if they wouldn't have injected the money they did, it would have been a heck of a lot worse, right? So eyes forward. We won't. I don't think need to complain or talk about the past much more. But let's just jump into it. So the 9 big buckets. The first one, Rob, is this 14-day waiting period, and we're like halfway through right now, right? This waiting period, because it was announced last week. Tell us more about what this means.
So what this really means is pretty straightforward. I mean, we could talk for an hour just on this one bullet point, but this country runs on small business, and the majority of the job creators in this country are small business owners, not big business. I know, big business might want to sell the public on that, but that's not actually the reality. So what this 14-day waiting period does, it says, hey, if you don't have fewer than 20 employees, you're kind of locked out for now. We need to get the help to the people that need it the most, because statistically, they're the ones that create and maintain the jobs in this country. So I think the current administration saw, again, I won't use the word flaw, I would say enhancement to the previous program to try to put the money where it's needed most. And people are gravitating towards it. I mean, there is a huge influx of loans being created in this marketplace. And I think that it's going to do what it was intended to do, get these small business owners back on their feet and make sure that employment continues to grow. Because if employment stays flat, we have a challenge in the country. And in fact, the jobs report comes out tomorrow for last month, and it's going to be very interesting to see where we land.
I think we're all going to get to watch you on the news tomorrow to hear your opinion on that jobs report. So we're looking forward to it. Hey, one of the things I almost think is an unintended positive consequence of this component to the reform is, what are we doing right now? We're just talking about it, right? So if you Google the PPP reform that came out, that was announced last Monday from the White House, this is the number 1 on the list, right? And so I think if the stats would suggest that this most recent round of PPP, as the money started flowing mid-January, it already was having a much bigger impact for smaller businesses than, say, round 2. But the sheer awareness that is coming, the Google's filled with articles right now on this topic and this topic alone, that I think just getting everybody talking about it. I've talked to so many entrepreneurs, they didn't think they qualified for money, so they never even tried round 1, and they do, right? And so I think the awareness is going to have a huge impact. What do you think?
Oh, they have not been shy about promoting the second round of the program. And I can tell you from speaking to regional and national bankers that that's exactly the case. Many people, just like you said, decided not to participate. And now they're kind of kicking themselves saying, oh my God, I really struggled. I had to lay people off, and I just didn't understand the program. And, shame on the federal government, shame on the individual, shame on their consultants. I don't really think so. I think that there was enough stress and burden and fault to go around where it wasn't perfection. And this round's not going to be perfection either. But, that goes back to, what is the federal government's role and responsibility, to support the American people and make sure the economy stays strong. And, others will argue that, they shouldn't have stepped in so much. We could have a whole webinar, specifically about that. But, we're on the right path, Mike. And I think with some of these reforms, it's going to do what it's intended.
Yeah, you know what? We did a webinar, I want to say it's probably October, November timeframe. The unfunded, underfunded state unemployment tolls this is gonna come back to us. So there are going to be other consequences we'll talk about in the future. But I'm on the same page with you. So focus on small businesses. I think it's safe to say most big businesses were already in line because they had the resources to do so. So I don't think this is hurting anybody. I think this is only helping and creating more awareness. Let's jump, and this really ties to the next topic, right? Which is, what are the enhancements for the sole proprietor, the independent contractor, and people who are self-employed, in how they get more relief?
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely a challenge in the last round, where they were, folks in this category that were didn't have employees or had an earnings at a separate level. The way that the PPP was calculated left them out of the entire mix, and it really wasn't quite fair. But I don't think that the plan contemplated how it was going to impact people until it was too late. So what the new part of the plan does is it basically established $1 billion set aside for this category, specifically in low and moderate income areas, for these self-employed individuals, for the independent contractors and sole proprietors, to be able to benefit from others that might have employees, that might have slightly larger organizations. And they're just as important too. Just because they're a sole proprietor doesn't mean they're not a business. The law should be treating them the same. And this is one of those enhancements that I don't have the statistic off the top of my head on how many are sole proprietors or independent contractors, but it's millions and it's millions. And this is really going to make a difference in getting money in their hands. Because remember, again, we could argue about, is this a handout? Is this that? Do they really need it? What the country needs is the hands in Americans, the money in Americans' pockets to be able to spend to keep the economy growing. And we can have judgment on this years from now, but if we don't do these things, my opinion is we'd be in a much worse situation. And if you recall, that unemployment in the middle of COVID was back at the Depression levels, the Great Depression levels, practically. And that's unbelievable for a country of 330 million, and not only the most powerful country in the world, but the most economically sound country in the world. So these things that get money in the hands of folks that drive the economy are going to make a massive difference, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, the $1 billion carve out for this group is huge, and it's interesting because there's obviously a correlation. So when unemployment hit historic lows, depression level lows, or excuse me, highs, we're also watching tax ID, the EIN registration numbers, and it is a hockey stick like the country's never seen before. The number of new tax entities that were set up in Q4 is just insane. It's always been kind of like this slow trickle up as we kind of moved more towards an entrepreneurial gig economy, 1099s. Think about Uber drivers. Think about freelancers. We've been moving that direction for a long time, but this thing just took off in the second half of 2020.
Well, Mike, I don't mean to interrupt, but think about what that really means. It also means that Americans, the majority of Americans, are not going to sit on their hands. If they got laid off, they got let go, they're going to figure it out. They're going to do, the majority of people are going to do what they have to do. And if that means, take a position that they might not have taken or strike out on their own, that's exactly what we're seeing. But isn't that kind of the fiber of the country's being to begin with? So it's not quite as shocking to me that this is happening. It's will these folks be successful, and will they have to use the federal funds to keep afloat for very much longer, because no government can sustain this kind of spending indefinitely.
Yeah, and last I'll say on this is just an exciting change to me. I mean, Rob, you've started businesses. I've started businesses. I grew up in an entrepreneurial home. Almost all businesses start with one person, right? Or a couple of guys in a garage. Some of our biggest, most well-known employers in the country with two people in a garage in Palo Alto or something like that, right? So this is huge and exciting. All right, next topic. And I think this is really important too, and this is obviously coming along with the times for your past doesn't have to haunt you, and we are still a country of second chances. So part of the reform was eliminating restrictions on entrepreneurs that had non-fraud related convictions in the past. What more can you tell us on the details?
Well, yeah, the original part of the law said that you couldn't one of the owners that had at least a 20% partnership couldn't have a financial fraud within the previous 5 years or a previous excuse me, the 20% rule was anybody for the last 2-year look back. And what they did with the new rule is they basically got rid of that. And what it's saying is, if you were convicted of some sort of financial fraud, even in the last year, and you own 20% of this business, they weren't going to hold that against the entire business. Again, what I implore people to do is not take a social stance right now on that. It's about the economy. And if you just look at it from a pure economic situation, I'm sure there's a very healthy percentage of business owners that have had challenges within the last year. But they could be one partner in a business, and should that business fail because of the challenges that one individual had, is number one. And number two, it's not that we should overlook some of our moralistic beliefs, but there is a greater good sometimes that comes from making decisions like this. And regardless of what you personally might feel about it, because some of our clients and the folks listening might be like, no, that's not fair, they don't deserve it. Well, in this case, it's not just about them, it's about us as a country. So I do think this is one of those rules that was a smart thing to do. And I think we're going to see the impact of that along with the other changes. That's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and we're not talking traffic tickets here, right? We're talking felonies. But I like that it's non-fraud. So if you stole from the government, if you frauded someone, no, you're excluded. That seems pretty reasonable. But obviously, we are, as a country, we're deep in a vigorous debate about criminal justice reform. Not appropriate for this show. We won't even go into it, but it's clear it's a movement that's happening. And I'm all for how do we support more entrepreneurship, right? If you can't get a job in corporate America because of some a smudge on your resume in your background, what do you do? You do the American thing. You start a business. Let's not hold those people back from growing and hiring more people and growing this economy.
And Mike, I think that this concept rolls into your next point.
Yeah. Keep going, Rob.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to let you set it up, but yeah. To me, this is a different side of the same coin, and student loan and any kind of debt like that is the biggest topic. It's constantly talked about with business owners. I know in my own organization, we've had folks that have crushing, student debt and have to pay the minimum, and during COVID had to stop paying. And this is a national debate. And again, you can choose sides, not today on this conversation, but when it comes to getting this PPP money in people's hands, as long as it's used for the appropriate building their business and keeping their employees, this is going to be a welcome addition, because the statistics are very high on folks that are delinquent on student loans. And I think this is going to help, again, get money flowing in the economy.
Yeah, and it ties back to all these EIN creations that are happening, right? If you've got a criminal record that's preventing you from joining corporate America, start a business. It doesn't get more American than that. If you're your mid-20s, you just graduated college a few years ago, you still got this massive debt, you can't get a job, go start a business, right? And so I actually think this is awesome, and it's completely separate from the forgiveness of debt. This has nothing to do with forgiveness of debt. This is simply, can these people who have unpaid student loans and they're past due for whatever reason, can they get PPP money? And PPP money, it's got qualifying contingencies, right? They can't go buy a boat, they can't buy a house with it. It's got to be spent for exactly what PPP stands for, the payroll protection, the Paycheck Protection Program, right? So they're using this money to fuel the economy, to grow their businesses, and ultimately to pay employees. So all good in my mind. Anything else you want to wrap up on that one, Rob?
Nope.
Okay. Next one. We can't avoid the politics because it's so deeply embedded in some of these changes, but it certainly ties to the entrepreneur, right? And so unpack number 5 here for us, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, here another divisive topic, and I'll stick to the party line with the previous ones, where again it's about the economy and it's about the greater good. And so what the new revisions say is that if you've got this ITIN number, or you've got a green card and you're legitimately here working, and you're a business owner, previously you were barred, from taking part of the PPP. Well, now that has changed. You still have to be lawfully here in this country, but usually someone with an ITIN, which is individual tax identification number, was not considered eligible for these programs. And again, you could argue this is an administrative shift that will probably continue in other areas of the government. But for our purposes today, there are many folks that are part of this country, that are part of the economy, that are on the fringe, that might not be tucked in the system as officially as every American may like or may see it. But they're big drivers of money flowing through the economy. And this is a good part of this particular rule. And I think it's a change that will add more jobs, more revenue, which will increase the tax base for the federal government and all the things that you'd expect it to do. But more importantly, put the money in the hands of the spenders. So I think this is a good call.
Yeah, and just we want to bring this clarity to this, right? So same as the non-fraud felony conviction, same as you're not up on your student loan payments. This doesn't reward any illegal activity, and so you have to be here legally. And I think most importantly, this is not a handout to anybody. No PPP money is, right? You have to spend the money on qualifying funds, the Paycheck Protection Program. So this money has to be used for payroll. It has to be used for rent, interest on mortgage, right? Utilities, PPP protection materials, masks and dividers, etc. So this is all about really helping entrepreneurs who follow the law. So there's nothing but good here. Okay, next one. Waste, fraud, and abuse. The government always wants to help us reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. What would you advise our audience here on this topic? I mean,
well,
face value, it's a good thing, right?
Listen, nobody wants the taxpayers' money, which all of this money that's coming from these programs is coming from every one of us. So you know how you hate it when your local government doesn't fill the pothole in front of your house as quickly as possible, and the guy down the street who's an elected official has got all his pothole fills. So this is a good thing. You don't want anybody fraudulently using this money. We've seen the information in the newspapers, some of the celebrities, some of the larger franchised unit potentially, that have taken advantage of this in a way that wasn't intended, but it wasn't clear. So, what they've done is they've made this, contingent on, passing the SBA fraud checks, and the Treasury's do not pay database and searching public records. In fact, they're actually doing manual reviews of and flagging random applications to make sure that this waste and abuse isn't taken care of. And to be quite frank, you could say, why didn't they do it the first time? They didn't have the people power. They didn't have the systems in place. We're lucky they got it done as well as they got it done. So now they're tightening it up, just like our listeners would do in their own business. When you start, it's a little loosey-goosey. You let people come in at this time. You let them wear this. You have, a client, that doesn't have the right contract or doesn't have a contract at all. And then when you start realizing, well, wait a minute, this isn't working. It's getting a little too big. It's getting a little unwieldy. I'm losing some stuff here. There's some things not going well. You start, tightening up. And that's all the federal government is doing here. And we expect this from our federal government, Republican or Democrat. And I think this was necessary.
Yeah, Rob, it's interesting. We talked about at the top of the hour. Obviously a year ago, 11 months and 1 week ago, whatever this whole thing really rolled out with FXCR and CARES, the erred on the side of speed, right? How do we inject money as fast as we can? Interesting. I got a family member when they applied for their PPP second draw here in January. They were at first denied because their application kicked back claiming that they were dead. So proof in the process that they are tightening up security measures. It turned out with a social security card, a birth certificate, and a driver's license proved that this person wasn't in fact dead, and they got their PPP second draw. But it's obvious that they are doing their best to try to prevent the waste and fraud.
And Mike, even with these measures in place, people are going to steal, they're going to cheat, and they're going to defraud the federal government and the taxpayers. You can't catch it all with roughly 330 million, residents and millions of business owners. But I know it's going to get better, and that's what I'm glad they're making some of these changes.
Yeah, amen. All right, number 7, transparency in the PPP loan application. So this is actually changes in the loan app itself, and it's a pretty subtle one. And this morning I was actually I downloaded the latest because I wanted to see it. I read about this the other day, but I compared to the original loan app, and really all I did, and it's I think it's going to have a significant impact. It used to be that the question about your demographic information, the self-reporting, so it's still optional. It was optional and it still is optional. It was the last thing. It was like you basically have 2 pages, 3 pages of a PPP loan app, and then a couple pages of instruction. And on the bottom of page 7 was the request for demographic self-reporting. And now it's about 2/3 of the way down on page 1. So Rob, what's the purpose of this, and how should people interpret that?
Well, first off, it's a good thing they moved it up. It's like reading, the headline of the New York Times, rather than buried in page 4. In page 4, the majority of the people aren't going to see it or pay attention to it, and it connotes a level of importance when you put it farther up in the application. And the reason I think it's important is, Americans are always very, suspect of why the federal government, many Americans are suspect of why the federal government wants certain information. In this case, I don't think there's anything nefarious. I think to be able to see what communities it's serving well and what impact it's having, you need this information. So I would implore folks to be as honest and, and forthright as they are, comfortable doing so about that situation. Every, handful of years, and I forget how often we do national census, maybe Mike, you'll chime in afterwards, but I'm not answering that because of this and that. And I get it. There's a privacy issue and people, and that's the great thing about America. You do have the right to participate in some of those things or not. But when it comes to this, for the program and the money to be spent properly, it just makes sense to get that data point, because then you know who you're serving and what your impact in those direct communities are. Yeah, it's probably true that, the politicians get a hold of it and they can mix the data up to help them get elected for this and that. But there's only so much we can do about that on a day-to-day basis. We've elected folks to supposedly act in our best interest. And I think the majority of our elected officials are going to be using this data for the right purpose. So, if I had an opinion on this, I'd say, provide the information if you're comfortable providing the information.
Yeah. So the census is every 10 years.
Thank you.
But you're welcome, Rob. But I think that a couple of points here. The goal of this reform is just transparency, right? I I think there'd be a lot of people with hair standing up on the back of their neck if this was a requirement to get a loan. It's not. It's self-reporting. It's voluntary. They just put it on page one to try to get more people to do it, so that they can then quantify and measure the impact of where the money is actually going, to see if the programs are having success in the way that they wanted. So, regardless of your political leanings, regardless of how you feel about these topics, just know that it is absolutely not tied. So they are trying to promote it by putting it on page one, but it's not a requirement to get the money, which I think is a really important clarification. Okay, a couple more topics from these reforms before we wrap here, Rob. The next one is around what the White House is in their press release on this called the digital front door. What changes are happening here?
Well, I can tell you again from the top of the call, I said that my company before the acquisition last year participated in the PPP loan. And to be quite frank, it was a mess. From the government page of just complete lack of clarity, where to click, how to get it, what it meant. It was incredibly frustrating. And even when you have professionals like I had, smart accountants, smart attorneys, it probably took 4 times as long as it should have. And I'm not really upset about it, only because, again, they had a very short period of time to build a portal that took massive amounts of people hitting it all at the same time, and they're improving upon it. The big story is that this digital front door that they're calling it, which is the website, the program's websites, are going to be much better and are much better, and they continue to update it as regularly as possible. And I think the speed at which you can get the information, the way that it's laid out, the way that the form works is much better than it previously was. And that moves people through the pipeline. So for all the entrepreneurs and business people listening, the technology does matter. Your interface does matter, how it looks and how people friendly it is, and thinks about how your brain works and what would logically be next. They did a better job. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. There's still a lot of bureaucracy that goes on with the federal government, but everybody's going to have a better experience, and I hope push through the process a lot faster.
Yeah, you know what? This is a screenshot from the SBA's website at literally this morning, and I can tell you. So I participate in a handful of small businesses myself, and I remember what it was like back in April of 2022, Rob. I mean, holy cow, filling out paper and then uploading all kinds of documents to a portal that 48 hours later, oh, we're overwhelmed. We can't do that. We're switching to online. And so go to the online, and then the site went down. I mean, it was craziness, right? So round 2, dramatically better in just seeing the updates that have happened already this year, even better with starting out as simple as, again, find a lender, right? Get matched with a lender, search lenders in your area. Is this a first draw? Is this a second draw? They've really simplified the process a whole bunch. And I think my experience is, just as we as entrepreneurs didn't know what the hell was going on, the SBA in Treasury, they certainly knew more than us, and it took them a few weeks to figure out how to actually administer and administrate the law that was recently passed. But I spent a lot of time talking to banks, and they had no idea what was going on, right? And that's where all the money had to flow through. So my experience here with round 2 is that what has helped as much as anything is the banks were familiar with the process. They knew how it worked. They knew how the money would flow. They knew how forgiveness would be handled. They knew what kind of documentation they were going to have to supply to attest to the money being spent the way it was supposed to be spent. So I think just because these reforms are important, but I think part of what's making this so much smoother is the entire system, the entrepreneur, the bank, SBA, Treasury. This is all about improving an existing process rather than inventing something from scratch.
And that rolls perfectly into our last point, which is the better banking partnerships. I mean,
say more on this, because I mean, This is kind of everything. Everything else we're talking about, these are real things. They're legitimate process changes, right? But I think this is maybe one that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, listen, when I did the first loan, and many of our clients and many of my personal friends and colleagues, you would call the bank and they're like, we don't know. We don't know. And the reason they didn't know is because they weren't informed, because it was all being created and launched at the same time. Now that happens in entrepreneurial worlds too. You half build it, you get it going, and you hope somebody buys something, and then you figure it out as you go along. I'm not sure why we expected anything different from the federal government and the banks. Now, in my experience, the big banks struggled much more than the modest sized banks, the regional banks, because they were a little closer to it. Their executives were a little closer to it, and they were a little more nimble. But a lot of third parties got engaged to work alongside the banks to help process their loans, because the banks couldn't get it together fast enough. I won't mention brand names now, but there's a ton out there that were doing these third-party connectivities to the bank to get the loans pushed through. And the SBA is working really hard to work better with these lenders to make the rules flow easier, to make the applications flow easier. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, the banks are the ones providing the money and the flow. The SBA might be backing it, but our national banking system is vital to making this work, because the SBA and the federal government had no capacity or way to do it. They had to rely on the free market and the free economy and the wonderful, complicated, difficult banking system that the United States had. But without it, the program would fail miserably. So I'm glad to see the administration's taking it seriously. And anybody that's applying now that applied last time, the phones are not ringing off the hook. A lot's getting done, but it's not chaos. It was barely organized chaos last time. Now it's okay. We got this, and we know what we're doing, and we're going to make it better for the consumer.
Well, the thing that I think is important that's happening this time too, I mean, it was certainly chaotic April 2020, but it really relied on people kind of in the know, right? That had to then be pounding their banks, and the banks that were even in the know, because there's over 5,000 participating banks with SBA, right? So they had to be the ones even pounding SBA and hopping on calls to get information. So it was a pull. Everyone was pulling, asking for information. The thing I like about here is they're on offense, right? They're proactively doing the outreach to have an impact, to educate people, and to educate people on all the programs that are available that might not have those existing banking relationships that someone like you had, Rob, right? So all good. All right, we covered the topics. I think this is a lot of good change. The money is going to continue to flow. $1 billion set aside, carved out just for for entrepreneurs who run the smallest businesses. All good news. Anything you'd want to say in closing here, Rob?
No, I think that the federal government is doing the best as it can to fix the challenges with the program previously. I think the intentions are well meant. I think that entrepreneurs and small business owners that we serve, the 60,000 clients that work within our framework at Assure, and all the other businesses are going to be well served by the changes that are taking place here. It's, there's a lot more detail. Mike and I covered a lot of it from a high level, but we always recommend you come back to our site to get more information, more detail. And I really appreciate the time with you, Mike, and speaking directly to our clients and the market at large.
Yeah, Rob, I always enjoy talking to you, and certainly the continuous dialogue we have with entrepreneurs, both clients and non-clients alike. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time, and just a reminder of who we are. Assure provides payroll, HR, time and attendance, and HR services to entrepreneurs. We have over 60,000 small businesses that we help stay compliant. We help them save money, and we help them grow their business. And with that, I think next week we are going to be talking about security. There were some security breaches in the last week here in this human capital management field, and we want to help entrepreneurs understand what you need to be aware of, what you need to be thinking about, how to protect yourself because it's not always about some hacker in a dark room busting into your systems. Sometimes security is all about human process. So there's the tease for next week. Rob, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to everybody else.
Thanks, Mike.